Chapter 17 Kuele 1919, the war over, and Istanbul filled with Allied commissioners and officers in their dull khaki uniforms. The sibilant twittering of the English language filled the air, and the English, with the French and Italians, supervised the police and the ports. They were everywhere, advising and ordering and suggesting. One day, my mother came home from Beyoğlu with two items of exciting news. The one concerned herself, for her designs and needlework were attracting attention. She had taken so many orders that morning that she wanted my grandmother to help her to complete them. This my grandmother was perfectly willing to do, for although she perhaps lacked true creative skill, she was an expert needlewoman, quite frequently paying more attention to detail than my mother. My mother had great sensibility, and during the times when she was working out her patterns, she could lose herself to the exclusion of her family and the world. Her designs were most vivid and appealing. They lived in bold colourings and outline as though painted on materials. A number of foreign women had asked for repetitions of her work, but she refused to repeat, even if the money offered was high. Instead, she would work out some new design for them, intricate or simple according to her mood of the moment, offering it casually as though it did not matter whether they accepted or not. I often wonder what they thought of her, so slim and haughty, with the flaring wing of nose and the delicate eyebrows that seemed painted on, her unveiled face and her halting French. Today, all women in Istanbul and the other cities and towns go unveiled, but in 1919 she must have been a rare sight. Many of the shops in Beyoğlu suggested that she should open an atelier, but she would laugh at them, saying she had no head for business. My grandmother, excited by the fuss created from my mother's designs, also nagged that an atelier was becoming essential. She even wanted to turn her bedroom into one, declaring that she would sleep somewhere else, but my mother held out against this for a long time. The year 1919 saw my family on its feet again, my mother being the breadwinner. The second item of news that spring concerned Mehmet and me. She had met in Beyoğlu the wife of the colonel in whose house I had been circumcised, but he was a general now and an important person in the War Office. His wife had been so delighted to see my mother after the lapse of years that she had insisted upon her returning home with her to partake of coffee and gossip about all that had happened in the years they had not met. She had hustled my unveiled mother into her husband's motor car, driven by his Batman, and my mother, never having been in a motor car before, was too terrified to speak during the journey to Bayezid. She told us that the sense of speed was terrible, that her heart had been perpetually in her mouth, and that every time another motor car had whizzed past in the opposite direction, she had closed her eyes and left herself entirely to God's mercy. This feminine attitude annoyed Mehmet and me, who would have given much to have been in her place. "But you are not afraid of trams," Mehmet said in great contempt. She replied that trams ran on lines and were, in consequence, perfectly safe. They did not go as fast as the motor car. During coffee, the general's wife had asked about us children, and when she heard of the difficulties of having us suitably schooled, came out with her suggestion that we should be sent to the military school. "The what?" roared my grandmother, perhaps feeling like us that she had not heard right, and a queer little excited feeling began to pull at my heart. "The military school," repeated my mother with some impatience. "She told me that a very close friend of her husband's is in the War Office and can use his influence to enter the boys. Apparently the government intend to establish a junior school which will be attached to the academy, and they will only accept pure Turkish children, so that eventually only Turkish officers will be in the army." "I shall be a general," I said boastfully, and Mehmet said gently, "I shall be a doctor, and then I can help the wounded soldiers to get better." And if I may digress a little, of the two of us, he got his wish. "But what sort of education will they get in a military school?" demanded my grandmother, who knew nothing about schools, but who always liked to put in her opinion. "How can I know?" demanded my mother, displeased that her startling news had not had a better reception. "I do not suppose it matters very much," she asked, "for they are going to be officers. They need to know very little, excepting how to kill each other, of course." "I shall not kill anybody," interposed Mehmet in his soft voice, taking her words with literal 7 years oldness. Do you really think that the general can do anything? I asked, thrilled by the idea of life in a military school, picturing it to be anything but what it turned out to be. Let us see, returned my mother. Anyway, the general's wife is going to see her husband's friend this afternoon to discuss it for me. Shameless woman, interjected my grandmother in horror, still firmly entrenched in the past, and we began to laugh at the bewilderment on her face, for she was half inclined to believe that the general's wife was conducting a clandestine affair with her husband's friend. That evening the general's Batman arrived with a letter from the great man himself, which said that he had talked over matters with the general in charge of the scheme, that he was willing to see us at the War Office the following afternoon, that he himself had given some information about the family and its present difficulties, that he hoped my mother would take advantage of the good life offered to her sons, etc. My mother thoughtfully folded the letter, and the widow, who was spending the evening with us, declared that good luck was returning to the family. Perhaps you are right, said my mother, but of course, I was told this afternoon that everything at the school is still very disorganized after the war, that it will take a long time before it settles back to normal. Still, it is a great opportunity. I began to laugh, remembering the barber shop, and my mother, with remarkable intuition, looked across at me saying, well, at least there will be no more coffee cups to break. The following afternoon, Mehmed and I were taken to the War Office, excitement and fear gnawing at our vitals, hunger too, for we had been unable to eat any luncheon. My mother seemed nervous also, but tried to put this behind her when we arrived at the War Office. A soldier showed us into the office of a very beautiful young officer, the general's adjutant, and he blushed when he spoke to my mother, asking her name and her business. She gave him this information, and he asked her to be seated for a moment and dashed gracefully into an adjoining room where presumably lurked the general. Mehmed and I stood awkwardly, whilst my mother sat stiff as a ramrod in a hard chair, a bright spot of colour in either cheek. The adjutant returned, saying that the general would see us at once. He held the door open, keeping his eyes respectfully on the ground as my mother passed him. I passed the door last of all, and looked back to see the beautiful young adjutant staring at my mother's back, an unreadable expression in his eyes. Maybe he thought it strange for a Turkish woman to go with open face. The general was tall and lean, with silvery hair and a kind, intelligent face. Or did it only seem kind as it looked at my mother with that especial look that even old men reserve for lovely women? He pushed forward an armchair for her, hard ones for Mehmed and me, and said with an affection of joviality, "What? Are these young lions yours?" My mother replied that this was so. "Well, well," said the general, as though this was a great surprise. "Our old friend General X has told me all about you. I once knew your father-in-law, in my youth, you know. A very fine man. I was sorry to hear that you lost your husband during the war. I'm afraid things cannot have been easy for you." "I lost my brother-in-law too," said my mother. "Very sad," said the general, painting sympathy on his face, and he fiddled with papers on his desk, and for a few moments they talked family gossip. Then the general turned to me and said, "So you are Irfan. How old are you, my boy?" "10, sir," I replied in a weak voice. This war, he sighed to my mother. "This child should have been at school 3 years ago. However, he looks intelligent. Let us see what we can make of him. So you'd like to be an officer?" he demanded, turning suddenly to me. "Yes, sir," I added, boldly. "I should like to be a general like you." He laughed. "Perhaps you will be," he retorted. "There's something at least to know what one wants from life." "And what about the little one?" he asked, chucking Mehmed under the chin, then saying thoughtfully to my mother, "Yes, he is like his grandfather. I can see the resemblance quite plainly." He mused over Mehmed's small, shut-away face, then asked, "What is your name?" "Mehmed, sir," stammered my brother, very red in the face with such close, unwelcome scrutiny. "And what do you want to be, Mehmed? A general too?" "No, sir," said Mehmed. "I want to be a doctor." "Two young gentlemen who know their minds," declared the general. "I remember when I was their age, I wanted to be a street seller, for they seemed to be the only people who ever had horses. But the only way I ever got a horse was becoming a cavalry officer. So perhaps to all of us fate gives our desires in a roundabout way." Well, he declared, turning his attention back to my mother, you appear to be a fortunate mother, for here you have in embryo a future general and a future doctor. He patted our heads and rang for his adjutant. I shall leave you in my adjutant's hands, he said to my mother, adding in a conspiratorial whisper, he knows far more about this business than I do. We went out to the adjutant's office, who said, you understand, Hanam Effendi, that you have to sign a contract for the military education of these two boys. No, said my mother. The adjutant grew red and could hardly bear to look at her. But did the general not explain? He said in astonishment. No, replied my mother. Dear, dear, said the adjutant fussily. Then he cleared his throat and tapped a piece of parchment with a finger. This contract, he began, states that your two sons shall be educated at the military school in Kulalai, and afterwards at the military college, providing they pass their examinations, entirely at the expense of the government. In return for this, they will serve in the Turkish army for 15 years, but if they fail in their final examinations, they will serve as sergeants for the same number of years, without any chances of promotion. There is no promotion from the ranks. That seems very hard, murmured my mother doubtfully. If I signed this contract, I signed for my sons' lives, away for 25 years, and how can I tell they will be able to pass their examinations or not? How can I tell? She said again, looking up at the young officer, and he smiled a little, remembering his own years in the military institutions. It is generally found, Hanam Effendi, that if a boy wants to become an officer, he passes his examinations. My mother smiled too. I think perhaps you are right, she said. Nevertheless, I should like a little time to think this over before, with a stroke of the pen, I take away their freedom. How long will it be before these contracts are ready for my signature? There are many formalities to complete first, replied the adjutant. Perhaps in 15 days' time? That surely gives me time enough to decide, answered my mother, and I was in agony that she, with her feminine prejudices, was going to take away this chance from my hands. I dared not interrupt their conversation, but I felt sick with apprehension that my bright and shining dream of becoming an officer or general would end in nothing. The adjutant explained that he required certain documents from the local police, from the muhtar, a certificate of good health, from the proper authorities, and 12 photographs of each of us. References are not needed, said he with some embarrassment, for General X has already given them. Thank you, said my mother, with a faint, ironical inflection in her cool voice, and the adjutant bowed us out of his office, his eyes once more on the floor, his attitude beautifully restrained. For the next few days, there was a great deal of argument at home, for my mother was extremely obstinate, refusing to be advised or guided by anyone. My grandmother said she could not understand why so much fuss was being made, since nothing very serious could go amiss with our lives whilst we were in the hands of the military authorities. But can you not see that other schools can be soon found again? Civil schools with a sound education, but without the tie of signing away their lives for 25 years. I do not want to go to any other school, I wept, impotent and unable to stand up against my mother's reasoning. I want to be an officer, please, I begged, as last sopped politeness. The battle rolled back and forth, now in favour, now against the military school. The neighbours animatedly joined in the discussion, my mother not listening to what they said, mistrusting everybody's opinion. In the meantime, however, she took us to the Bayezid police for the necessary papers. We went to the Muhtar's office, to the hospital for examination, and having obtained all the relevant documents, we went to be photographed, and still no final decision was forthcoming from my mother. I took to going to the mosque, praying fervently in that cool, quiet place. I prayed no prescribed prayers, for I was unable to concentrate on anything but, please God, let me go to the military school. Please God, let me go to the military school. Saying the same thing over and over again in feverish intensity. And perhaps a benevolent God heard my anxious prayers, for the evening the finished photographs arrived, my mother announced that she had carefully thought everything over, and that she was convinced she was doing the right thing in allowing us to go to Kulalai. Once again we visited the War Office, my mother leaving us in the adjutant's room while she went to speak to the general in private. As she was departing, he said, "Personally, I think you have made a wise decision, and good luck to you and your sons." The contracts were signed at last, and only then did I feel able to breathe properly. It was done now, could not be undone. Oh, proud and lovely moment. We had been given to the Kulalai Military School, that long, white, rambling building that I was to know so well. The adjutant solemnly shook our hands. "Report to Kulalai on the 15th of May, he said crisply, in a man-to-man tone of voice, and I grew scarlet with pleasure. May 15th, 1919 is a date in Turkish history, for on that day Kemal Ataturk sailed towards Samson. It was the date the admiral of the British Mediterranean Fleet declared that the Greeks could occupy Izmir. And that was the day too that I entered Kulalai. Young and insignificant, and as yet untried by life, yet could I also claim a share in the date that was making Turkish history. The moment dawned fair and promising, and Mehmed and I were taken by my grandmother to the mosque to pray. We prayed for different things, we three. My grandmother prayed for our health and our success in school life. I know, for I heard her loud, rumbling voice intoning. Maybe Mehmed prayed to become a doctor, but who can say, for Mehmed could be as secretive as the grave. I prayed one little prayer only. I gave thanks because I was going to Kulalai at last. Over and over again I prayed, thank you God, and felt his invisible presence all around me. Goodbyes were said to the street, for we did not know when we would be returning again, and the old women cried over us, and the old men sighed and wished they were young again. And eventually we got away for the Galata Bridge and the boat that would take us down the Bosphor to the beginning of our youthful dreams. Were we nervous, I wonder, that May morning? Just the littlest bit reluctant to leave home and familiar faces so far behind? I do not think so, although looking back from this distance, it is no longer possible to judge that with any accuracy. We went to the boat, dressed stiffly in our best, our faces and hands so clean and shining that all who saw us must have realized that this was a great occasion. And in my case, whenever we passed a French or British officer, and the way to Galata Bridge was thick with them, I felt proud of the future my mother had chosen for me, and told myself that I too should one day walk like this, in uniform, the badge of rank on my collar. My mother allowed me to buy the boat tickets, and I felt very important, as though the humble clerk who attended to me should know that I was bound for Kulalai and adventure. When I requested 3 tickets for Chenikakoi, he paid no attention to me, as if I was the merest passenger and not a potential general. But my inflated ego was not jolted, and I talked loudly to my mother and Mehmed about Kulalai and what I would do there. Once my mother said, "Hush," but not sharply. It is very vulgar to boast, you know. But thoughts of vulgarity would never be able to dampen enthusiasm. We bought Simmet on the boat, and I dimly remembered Sarayir and my father came back fleetingly for less than a second to tantalize with his shut-away face, and Aunt Aisha smiled welcome, but Uncle Ahmed stayed frustratingly just outside the line of mental vision, refusing to show his face. But Sarayir was more than just an hour down the Bosphor. Sarayir was 4 years away, and deader for us than its dead owners. I asked Mehmed if he remembered Sarayir and Uncle Ahmed, and he looked vague and said he did not. And I tried to paint a picture for him, there on the boat, of that old red-roofed house we had visited before the war. The pictures poured through my brain like pictures shaken up in a kaleidoscope. I talked of the magnolia trees that had stood on the lawn, of the shine on the grass when the sun came out to dry the rain, of the dogs, Fidele and Jolie, of the grapes on the house vine of which my aunt had been so proud, and I was taken to Sarayir again. I used to fish in the Bosphor with Uncle Ahmed, I told Mehmed's listening face. We never used to catch very much, but it was fun rowing home under the moon and sometimes hearing the voices coming across the water from the Istanbul side. I did not know you would remember so much, said my mother, and you have a gift for words, my son. You have brought Sarayir back to me again too. I hope I have not done the wrong thing in entering you for a military school. Perhaps you would have been better service somewhere else." "Of course not, Mother," I said indignantly. "I want to come to Kulalai, and I should have hated any other school. I'm going to be an officer, and one day I shall be a general. You will see. I shall carry you everywhere on my arm, and all the people will say that you look young enough to be my wife, and the women will be jealous of you." My mother laughed merrily. "Your imagination is too vivid," she said, and misplaced at that. We reached the boat station of Chinikakoi and disembarked, feeling less important now that we were so near our goal. "Kulalai," my mother asked the ticket collector. "The military school?" "Turn to the left," replied the ticket collector briefly, only barely glancing at Mehmed and me. "It is only a few minutes' walk from here, and the school is so big you cannot miss it." So out to the quietest, dusty roads of Chinikakoi, and along the sea road, tree-lined and white in the noonday sun. The school loomed up on our right, like a palace, I thought, so white it was against a cloudless summer sky that 15th day of May in 1919, the day Ataturk's little boat rowed across the waters to Samson. We mounted the stone steps to the main door, and my heart had commenced to thump furiously. A porter on sentry duty asked my mother's business, and she said she had come to leave us at the school, as arranged with the War Office. "This is the military college," he informed her coldly. "The school is on the hill, along this road and up. It is a big grey building, and you will find it quite easily." Up the hill road we toiled, hot and uncomfortable, disappointed that the white shining palace was not for us after all. We arrived at the school panting and out of breath, and a great iron-barred gate prevented us from entering. There was the sound of boys' voices, and a few of them came nearer the gate to look at us. There was a sentry box near the gate, and a soldier on guard there shouted, "Hussein Aga! Hussein Aga!" And down towards the gate came an old man with flowing white beard and a bent back, and he grumblingly withdrew the bolts of the gates and asked our business. My mother told him, but this time impatience made her imperious, and she tossed her piled-up curls, and the old man grew civil and eyed her unveiled face with open curiosity. He allowed us to enter the garden, motioned to my mother to take a seat under the cool shade of the trees, and said he was going to look for the captain, and muttered a bit to himself, as though uncertain where to find the captain. My mother sat down gratefully, for the heat had tired her, and while she was resting I strolled away to explore. I went near to the gate, and I saw two men unloading lamb carcasses from a cart, and another man was carrying a sack of something that, from the partially opened top, looked like spinach. An old man, who might have been a cook or a kitchen servant, was haggling over the lamb, and several mangy curs snarled under the horse's legs and were kicked away by the men. I heard Mehmed's voice calling for me, and I ran back to where I had left him with my mother, and saw that Hussein Aga was back again and waiting to lead us to the captain. We came near to the main school building, and to our left there was a long one-storied hut, which, judging from the noise of the cutlery, was the dining room. The din coming from there was appalling, and several big boys were entering. Most of them had very dark skins, and one was, to my horror, quite black. They were shabbily dressed, and looked jeeringly at Mehmed and me, and talked amongst themselves. One of them said something aloud to us, and I could not understand what language he was speaking. "He's not Turkish," I said to myself, and wondered how many different nationalities might be housed in this place. The captain met us at the door of his office, with a big stick in his hands. He looked a very nervous type of man, and was very pale. He clutched his stick fiercely, as though he was accustomed to quite frequently defending himself from the hordes of young savages in the school. He took us into his room, and gave us rickety chairs to sit on. The room was indescribably dirty and untidy, and the captain stuttered so badly every time he spoke that I felt a sort of hysteria becoming the bubble inside me. He thumped through a pile of papers on his desk, and finally extracted two, which evidently related to us. "Irfan and Mehmed?" he asked, and my mother replied that this was so. "Turkish and Muslim," he said and sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Thank God for that," he said, stuttering very badly. 2 more Turks in the school. He looked at my mother. We are, unfortunately, not yet organised here, he said. There is still a great deal to do, and we've been saddled with many Kurds and Armenians from eastern Anatolia, and there are, as yet, only a few Turks. No doubt one day the authorities will make up their minds which are to remain and which are to be sent elsewhere. Our intention, Hanım Efendi, is to bring up a new generation of purely Turkish officers. It was odd, but when he commenced to speak in sentences, he forgot his stutter and poured out a lot of irrelevant detail to my mother, as if now that at last he had begun to unburden himself, he could not cease. When he had tired himself with talking, he stood up and said, with the stutter back again, his mouth twitching nervously, "Well, Hanım Efendi, you may safely leave the boys in my hands. You may visit them once in a week, if you wish, but they will not be permitted to go home until they have had several months' training." My mother thanked him, and we kissed her hands, and Hussein Aga shuffled out into the garden to escort her to the main gates. Mehmed and I were left alone with the captain, and he looked at us quizzically, and we solemnly looked back at him, and I remembered all the things he had told my mother. And suddenly 25 years seemed an awful long time, a lifetime surely. I looked through the unclean windows into the rank, untidy gardens, where the hordes of boys were streaming from the dining room. My heart began to beat nervously. The guild had worn a bit off the gingerbread. It was still true that this was the military school, to which I had passionately wanted to come. But where was the glamour I had expected? The pomp, the military splendour?